And I started getting interested in technology and these little issues. Some people were whispering that, hey, you know, computers were attached to large control systems. Nobody knew what a control system was, but like read, you know, it's power plant type stuff. Little stories started bubbling up. And so I was working for a member of Congress, and all of a sudden, like, a constituent, you know, came in. His name was Joe Weiss, who's a big guy in the control systems world, and he was saying, hey, there's this weird threat that is being seen all around the world, and you know, could be the first time that a nation state's going after power grids. And it was a very scary threat, big thing going out. The New York Times comes out with an article just a few months later, and it's Stuxnet, right? And so that was sort of really the launch then of the public focus on security. And from there, you know, it's been off to the races, right? Like, cybersecurity has been a forefront issue and a scary issue for the public, for senior leaders, for everybody. But there hasn't really always been a great job at describing to do what beyond kind of the scare, right? Like, you start seeing things like the Ukrainian power grid like get hit by black energy. Like, well, what do you do about it, right? Like, oh, you buy more security. It's like, well, what do you buy, and like, is that really the answer? And really, like, what it actually does, what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, is something that we found from Homeland Security. As I worked for Homeland Security for 3 years, doing joint Department of Defense and DHS programs, which essentially means that we're trying to get all the national assets of the US government and then bring them to support US critical infrastructure and private companies. So deploying teams when we knew that there was an incident, going out and doing research and public engagement whenever we had, you know, a major issue, a piece of critical infrastructure, kind of like the good guys choppering in with all their boxes. And you know, it's like we ran into the classic problem of, you know, we're the government, we're here to help, right? And they'd be like, no, thank you. But a lot of times when we get in, you know, people were very scared, not because of the threat, but because they knew that their level of understanding of, you know, the problem and their risks was much, much lower, and their eyes had sort of been opened by this briefing. And specifically, it wasn't the technology people, it was always the executives that were like, I didn't even know this was my problem, right? Nobody told me that this was my problem that I had to pay attention to. And we even had one case where a CEO came into the room after we had assembled other people, and he looks around the room and he's like, all of you guys are from Homeland Security, right? And one person in the back raises his hand and he says, sir, I'm your CISO. You know, it's like, if you don't know the guy who is, you know, in charge of looking at your cyber risks, like, that's probably a problem, right? That probably says that as a senior leader, you don't really understand, you know, what your job is. So a lot of things that we did in Homeland Security, programs I worked on, were about educating senior leaders. So senior leaders in Congress, so they can make legislation that made sense. So we ended up doing the voluntary framework, the NIST framework, but then also when we deployed, giving CEOs a little leave behind, and I'll run through that at the end. But at Palo Alto Networks, so I've joined the private sector about 1.5 years ago, moved back to California, and joined, and I'm in charge of cybersecurity strategy. So I oversee our threat intelligence, and my sort of pet project is how can we build a program around educating senior leaders? How can we translate up all of the stuff that we talk about in cybersecurity that is both a mix of scary but also practical solutions up for senior leaders so they're not just getting hammered by the headlines. So the presentation I have is a little bit of a mix about like what we've been doing at Palo Alto Networks, but it's primarily designed to be given to a CEO audience. So a lot of the stuff I talk about is to be designed to give it up to that. So it's some good examples of how you yourself can message up about cybersecurity and what to do about it, not just the threats, right? So, you know, like I said, I started off with the newspaper headline, right? And it's, why do you always see cybersecurity in the headlines today? Well, it makes a good story, right? And you know, it seems like nobody really has a good plan for tackling it. But the scare part of it isn't the real reason why we continue to see cybersecurity come up time and time again, right? Because we also see cybersecurity come up in major policy initiatives. This is President Obama back at Stanford last year when he announced an initiative we got to work on, putting in chip and PIN and working with the credit card industry. So now all of our credit cards have chips. So bringing us up to date with where Europe was a few years ago. But it's been a major focus of the administration. You hear them talk about cybersecurity all the time, and it's a part of their major core platform. The candidates now are talking about it. Some of them talking about it for some reasons than others. But it's on the top of executives' minds. It's on the top of public policy. We even have our own combatant command for cybersecurity. And it's like, what is it about cybersecurity that is so special? There are no, that's reaching the boardroom levels. It's becoming its own individual topic for presidents, military commands, and boards. And why don't you see this for other large dynamic forces in the technology market today, right? You don't have any presidential summits on SaaS, but we're all redefining our architectures, and there's a whole new economy growing up around this technology. You don't see any military commands for mobility, but arguably every soldier that has a connected device is potentially an insider threat. And you don't have any standing board committees for cloud, even though we've got some really good data showing that boards are specifically focusing on paying attention to this, especially after Target, as we all know. And one of the issues is the complexity of our digital world, right? And so it's not even that cybersecurity is important because it's scary, but really because, as we were sort of talking about a minute ago, we have been networking everything, and we continue to go. And this image is one of my favorite shots. It's a screenshot of mine on my desktop background. And what it is, it's a tool called Shodan, which is essentially Google for internet-connected devices. So the types of things that control switching for dams, for power plants, nuclear facilities. Every one of those dots is one of those machines open and connected to the public internet. And so that means that every one of those dots is a potential point of critical vulnerability, right? It may have some security on it, but it at least responds to somebody poking around, which is never good. Because if you start poking around, you eventually start poking into the right thing, right? And what you can see is that the areas with expanding economic development, really like exponentially increasing economic development, are also the areas with the brightest colors, the hardest spots, right? So what does this mean? It means that we have not only networked our world, we have also networked the entire economic engine that drives everything we do day to life, right? And as we develop, and as these areas that are darker become brighter, cyber is only going to become more important. And the reason why it's cyber that's so important is because of all those things I talked about earlier, it is the key between them. So some of the other tectonic shifts, right, in technology. SaaS, I talked a little bit about. But social consumerization, right? I mean, us putting our information up online. I'm not a millennial, but I've got family that are millennials, and they don't even think about, putting stuff online or not. They just do it, right? That's the world that we live in. That's one of the main drivers of commerce and advertising. You look at virtualization and cloud. We talk to, I would say there are very few customers that we talk to at Palo Alto Networks today that are not at least considering at least a hybrid architecture, right? Because of the massive efficiencies and scalability you can do. And the mobility. This has been an issue for a long time, and we've been bashing our head against it. These are all massive tectonic shifts. But what really happens and what we really see is that these are also massive opportunities for taking advantage of that fabric, that network fabric that we've put through the rest of our digital life, right? So one of the things that we present to executives are like some hard numbers, right? They like to see numbers. And so if you look at this report from Gartner, it just gives a quick case study about the explosive growth in SaaS. And a lot of times, talk to financial institutions or more established firms, they say, well, SaaS is for startups, right? Like it's for small companies that aren't using it. SaaS is for everybody. Everybody is using SaaS. And sanctioned SaaS is becoming even more popular now. What we've seen in the large enterprise deployments of Box, of course, that Facebook for Work is just coming out. Facebook for Work, that's crazy, right? That's multiple one of those points. And so when we talk about something like SaaS, you want to think about that it's not just a fun new technology coming out, but really what you're doing is you're eliminating your perimeter. You no longer can think in a physical network side. You have opened up a world of shadow IT, you or your individual users. And so when you're talking to an executive, a lot of times they'll be thinking, okay, my network is a circle, and it's defended at these points. And you got to say, do away with that. Like, the Matrix, there is no spoon, there are no walls, right? Like, we now have all of these threats across your entire infrastructure, wherever you look. And you can tie in and look about direct financial loss, people coming in. Reputational harm is a big one and very hard to quantify until you get hit by it. Legal liability, third-party liability, like Target had, which is HVAC vendor. And competitiveness. There were many times in the government that we would see sensitive IP go out and be released in other places, in other products, right? I mean, this is really happening. It's not just like a threat or story. So these are some of the key reality points that when you're talking to a senior executive, you can bring back something like SaaS and show how it could affect all these core areas that they understand, they know how to quantify their risk and their investment levels. And you ask and you say, really, okay, like, why is this threat happening? Why is cybersecurity becoming such a big deal, and why are these areas under threats? Translating once again, talking about the economics of the problem, rather than the technical bits of the problem. The technical bits of the problem oftentimes tend to turn off a lot of senior leaders because they are apprehensive of it. Even if they have the capacity to understand it, they don't want to, right? But if you can explain it in terms of an economics argument, it makes a much clearer case. So what we have seen is that there has been an increase in adversary skill set and tools. So democratization of the threats, hackers learning from each other, and the tools getting cheaper. And as this innovation improves and drives these attack toolkits, it increases the number of them out there, and they get cheaper, right? Supply and demand. And so they're using these advanced tools to gain more and more successful attacks. Not just attacks, right? Attack volume, nobody cares. But successful attacks, because of this advanced level of tools, is being exponentially grown. And so what that means is that the cost of launching a successful attack is also going down. Ergo, every cyber attack, the profit gets higher for the attackers, right? And this is a trend that we've seen time and time again. We actually did a study with the Ponemon Institute, which I'll talk a little bit about this afterwards. But we surveyed both the black, the gray, and the research community. So people from looking at this issue, actual hackers from all sides, and all of them agreed that there are some core economic forces at play here. And so our solution has been to throw as much knowledge at it as possible, right? The space race, get as many big minds going. We're all going to go to the moon. We've tried this with cybersecurity. We pull in feeds. We put in intrusion detection systems. We build up as many alarms as we can. This is the way we thought in the government, too, a little bit, was that if we could see everything, if we had perfect intelligence, then we should be able to stop everything. But the issue is that we didn't really do that second part, that we really struggle with how do you use that intelligence without drowning in it. And instead, what we would do is we'd look to all of these different vendor solutions, build up something for this, something for that, because every feed you had, you wanted something boutique to use it, right? So that means that not only are you drowning in the data, but you're also trying to manage this complex environment. And as you sort of know from your basic network security classes, the more complex an environment you make, the more difficult it is to defend, because the larger your attack space you're creating, right? This is borne out in some of the numbers, not just from us, but from Gartner, New York Stock Exchange, Georgia Tech, PwC. Shows a pretty bleak picture, right? Looking at the risk management style, so people, process, technology, see that 80% of security incidents happen because of human factors. This is something that technology, can't even touch. A lot of times they're just human mistakes, malicious or not. You see that 68% of CIOs consider, risk management inadequate, which risk management is what we're putting a lot of our money in. So what's the delta? What's the delta there? Directors don't believe they're secured. Half of boards don't know how to do their incident response plans. $25 billion is spent a year. That's a huge, huge market, which is good for vendors, but not necessarily good for people trying to prioritize their investments, right? How do you swim in a $25 billion market when there's so much out there? And that only 37% of businesses surveyed actually think about their investments aligning with their understanding of risk. I mean, that's crazy, right? If you were going to go in and build a product and launch it out to market and try and capture a new market, you would know all about what risks and rewards were coming in. But in security, under 40% of organizations surveyed here were just we just got to buy stuff and put it up there. And so we ran a survey with Georgia Tech, surveying an international group of board members to see if this was actually an issue that they were trying to get their heads around. And we actually found some pretty heartening numbers. So this survey had been run in 2012, and since that time, it had doubled the amount of respondents that had said, yes, we are paying attention to this issue. So they were waking up. This is post-Target too, right? Board focus, North America is the leader in this area. So we're doing something right. I was just in Sydney, Australia last week, and they're at a different cycle than we are. They're kind of now stepping into the thought of, oh, we do have this responsibility. How do we do it, right? And so we're trying to talk about how do we help them skip past the lessons that we had to slog through and get our head beaten against the wall to learn. And then finally, the risk management. You know, this is what we're really going. This is the approach we've all agreed to take for cybersecurity. And 93% now of boards are looking through their risk management reports. May not be cyber, but it tells us that this is an area that we can talk to boards through this channel. Well, what do you say to them? This is the issue that we would always have with the overwhelming amount of data that we'd take in. And is that we were taking in data, but we were not actually thinking, what can we do for a positive outcome? So instead, we like to tool and we talk about prevention, right? And prevention is kind of a weird, dirty word because we moved away from it a long time ago. We said, you can't stop a determined hacker, so you shouldn't try. Instead, we need to catch them after they're in and try and clean up after they've left, right? And if we can do that fast enough, then maybe we can limit the amount of damage they're able to do. The problem with that is that if you're not even trying for prevention, you're missing an entire opportunity to gain leverage on them. And you want to use economics to do that leverage, right? So if you think back to economic theory, what can you do to disincentivize the attackers? From our study, we learned that 70% of those committing cybercrimes are directly financially motivated. So there's hacktivism, nation-state, financial. What we've seen that financial is a huge chunk, right? And what we also found is that a good chunk of those are opportunistic. Opportunistic means that it's a mugging rather than a bank robbery. So it's like, it's not Ocean's 11, it's some guy walking up and taking your iPhone out of your pocket. Although in this case, you're really like holding your iPhone above your head and screaming, I have $100 in my pocket, which is more often the case than not. The fascinating thing, though, that we most found out about this is that the researchers, so this is a combination of people who have said themselves they do illegal hacking, that they say, I do sort of gray hacking. The stuff I do may not be legal, but it's for research. And then white hat hackers, security professionals. There's a group of those guys, right? They all said that what does it make you to quit a target? So when you're working on a target, what's going to make you quit? And they said, I don't know, about like 2 days of work relative to the time of target, right? There were some targets that were high cost or high value, so they spent a little bit longer. But what we found is from one target to the next, eliminating and canceling out the size of industries, size of companies, 2 days. If you can frustrate them for an extra 2 days of work, it's not worth it. The profit isn't there, right? So going back, how do you do this? How do you prevent cyber attacks? How do you gain leverage on the attackers and use economic forces against them? The kill chain, right? I mean, this is an idea that we've all been talking about. But it's not just the idea of an attacker's plan, but it's an idea of building your strategy at every point, right? Building your strategy such that as an attacker moves down this, your strategy gets smarter and you learn from where they're going and you adjust your defenses along the way. The way that we do this is that we do this through intelligence, prevention, and sharing. This is our threat prevention engine, these sort of three core pillars, right? And the first side of intelligence, we've got our global platform and our threat intelligence cloud linked up through all of our customers so that we can see the storm clouds rising on the horizon in one sector or part of the world and start looking for corresponding indicators. A massive nation-state campaign that we came out with earlier this year, we had actually seen that malware resident for 7 years, but nobody had actually gone and looked at that malware. So we started pulling it apart, found out that same malware was attached to Android malware that we'd seen in another part of the world. All comes back together. It turns out it's a nation-state level espionage campaign going after minority ethnic populations in China. It's been going on for 7 years, but all the pieces have been out there in the public, but nobody had thought to actually correlate all those pieces together, right? So it's important to have that broad visibility and have intelligence that's actually useful for pulling together that story. Our team that does this is called Unit 42. They put out excellent reports multiple times a week. They just came out with a great report on a Mac OS X Trojan or Mac OS X exploit, excuse me, that was attached, and the dummy document was on the Russian space program, targeting anybody who'd be interested in the Russian space program using a Mac. I mean, that's pretty much screams like West or allies, right? That's serious stuff. And Mac, too, which you don't see a whole lot of. These guys are great on their own, but the really cool thing they do, I'm going to talk about in a minute. But first, prevention, right? So you go back to and you say, like, well, why isn't response and detection enough? I think we've seen, over the past couple of months that ransomware is one of the primary examples about why you have to focus on prevention. You have to try for prevention, right? You see hospitals, I'll name them, coming out, paying large ransoms, which just encourages us more. A little bit of facts on ransomware. We've seen, since 2013, an annoyance turn into a strategic threat. So the FBI announced that by April of this year, there had been 10 times as many ransomware payments as there were in all of 2015. This problem is not only getting worse, it's accelerating. And it's accelerating because of this little guy right here, CryptoWall. So CryptoWall was one of the really first economic cybercrime tools that came out for the ransomware family. These guys were smart, right? What they did is they married high-quality encryption, so once again, the proliferation of advanced tools like strong encryption, with very strong Bitcoin infrastructure technology. So that means that they're able to permanently lock your computer, guaranteed it's locked, and then make it very easy for you to pay the anonymous payment. They've created a very low-friction business environment. It's all about profit, right? How do you speed up time to delivery? Why does Amazon have one-click purchase? It's the same thing with ransomware. These guys have realized it's a lucrative business, and they're professionalizing their tools as much as possible. The last thing, the core piece of this, I'm talking about with Unit 42 is sharing. And it brings these two stories together. About 2 years ago, our CEO decided that we had to start working. The security industry is the only industry that doesn't share information with other members, right? Because traditionally, we have been competitors on what we knew, right? We compete on how good our sensors are, how much we know, versus how much our other competitors know. But this is a failed model, right? Because if we're all trying to compete on what we know, we're doing that problem at the beginning where we're just creating more noise for everybody, for all of our customers. So we worked together with Fortinet, McAfee, and Symantec to build a group to share out information on not just indicators, but actual campaigns. So if we understand that there's a group of people out there doing one specific bad thing, and we can see A through B, and our competitors can see D through F, that we can put those together, have a bigger picture, and then what we compete on is what our products do to enforce prevention on them. And this came out in a massive report that we did, a large takedown on the version of CryptoWall version 3. So we had identified with our partners $325 million for this one version of CryptoWall. We knew all their command and control infrastructures, all their IPs. We knew their malware. We had 4,000 samples of their malware, actually. We had them dead to rights, right, in our scope. And we all clicked shut. We kicked them off all of our customers' networks. Pop the champagne, everything's grand. Except within 24 hours, there was CryptoWall version 4. And if you're just looking at this superficially, that says, my God, that's depressing. Those guys are really, really good, right? But if you look at this another way, think about how long it takes Apple to release new updates for iOS. iOS is their core moneymaker, right? They only do updates new frequently. If Apple's going to do a 24-hour update release, that means there's a massive security vulnerability in every iPhone in every user's hand. Because if something goes wrong, that's their business. These guys are the same way. They saw a massive strategic threat to their business, and they responded within 24 hours. That means that our model has got them where it counts. So now we're in the process of building out members of the Cyber Threat Alliance, building out our infrastructure, and being able to do this at speed, faster and faster and faster. Because if you can start looking at campaigns and start taking this action against entire campaigns, you're not just worried about the millions of indicators a day, right? You're actually looking at a smaller set of information that you can really implement protections against. And the idea is eventually, if the community can get good enough at sharing information and competing on competition, we all compete to how good we are at blocking, then that means we're able to clear away at least a whole class of threats. It was the idea Chris Rock said, you solve gun violence by making every bullet cost $1 million, right? You make every cyber attack be a nation-state level, whole-of-state trial effort. If someone's going to attack you on cyber, they've got to have massive teams of people and massive infrastructure to do it. And even then, we'll be able to catch them and kick them out quickly. That disincentivizes cyber as a primary form of attack and increases the trust that we are placing across that map that I showed you earlier. One of the other efforts we're also doing is this open source tool called MindMeld. If anybody's a security professional out there, I encourage you to go look it up. It actually allows you to take in indicators from Palo Alto Networks Threat Intelligence Service Autofocus and correlate them back with anything else that you want to set up. It's a miner, so it takes our indicators and allows them out. We're looking at deploying this in information sharing organizations as well for not just our indicators but others, so that you can correlate common threat feeds and produce automated actions off them. The other thing we're doing is at a different level, a non-technical level. So a pet project that I've been working on the C level is something called the Security Roundtable. And so this is pulling together a lot of experts who have experience translating cybersecurity issues up very well, breaking out content from them that's refreshed every week around planning, preventing, and responding to cyber attacks. These are one-sheeters or one-minute videos that are designed to be forwarded or emailed, very easily print off, to hand to a senior executive and say, hey, we're facing a problem with this. Here's this great article by someone who's a real thought leader on it. The conditions I have for this site are there can't be any product pitches, so no product sold, and it can't be doom and gloom. So you have to actually be proposing a solution. Point in case, our CEO has written an excellent article walking through a lot of this issue we face with lack of trust and the reason why you focus on prevention. And walking through, it's not just advanced technology, but you need the right processes that take advantage of your people, and you need to share information as a community. So these are key points that we like to advocate as well. So back to kind of finishing on some of the questions that I would end with when we were with Homeland Security talking to a new CEO. We came up with these questions after a lot of different briefings, and they're specifically designed to do two things. The first thing they're designed to do is to encourage a senior leader to ask questions that'll solve problems. If they're going to ask a question, you want them to be going, you want their support staff and their technology staff to go out and find the right answers. The second thing it was set up to do is to make senior leaders look really smart, right? Because you want your boss to look smart. So we're making these little note cards, and they could study them before they'd have a meeting, going over their incident response plan or their risk management strategy, read the cards, have some smart questions to ask, right? So I'm passing on these questions you can take. The first one, obviously, you have to know what your level of business risk is. Because if you're coming in to look at your investments in cybersecurity, you can't just look at it and say, what are the threats? Because threats are everything, right? But you need to figure out what is most important to keeping the lights on in your organization every day. Or what is core to your mission, right? There have been a lot of instances, I think you read pretty much every headline, and a lot of the major attacks were not just because maybe there wasn't the right technology in place or they didn't really deploy it correctly, but largely it was because they didn't understand what they had to protect. They thought, oh, just credit card information, we'll protect it, right? They didn't think about the supply chain infrastructure or delivery infrastructure or the critical IP that they may have. These are things that they didn't think were necessary to protect. Does your board know about these risks? So the board's responsible for risk oversight, right? Why not cyber? If your CEO doesn't know your CISO, probably the board doesn't know about your cyber risks, right? So having that introduction and finding someone on your board that you can use as your champion to have these discussions. So it doesn't have to be that you have a board member who is a cybersecurity whiz or has a background in spooky stuff, but rather all board members should have this intellectual curiosity for technology. We had a great summit with board members at RSA with the New York Stock Exchange, and we got together over 200 board members to do some roundtables talking, and we asked them all, what's most effective at figuring out what your cyber risks are. And one board member who hires other board members said to us, he said, if I come across a board member that has never used Uber, actually used it, they know what it is, but never actually used it to get someplace, I don't hire them. Because they said, if you are not at least interested in the technology trends, the modern business today, there is no business that does not involve the network society. And if you're not participating in that directly, it shows that you don't have the intellectual curiosity in order to do the oversight role that's necessary for modern board members. So we said even more important than having a security person is having that willingness to understand those technology risks, those network risks to your business. Third is applying industry best practices. This is a no-brainer, right? But there are a lot of times when you'll pick something off the shelf and say, I'm going to do this standard, or I'm going to apply to this framework just because, right? But actually working among your industry peers is critical because that's who you're going to be judged against. And this was one of the things in the NIST framework that we really looked at was to have it be broad enough so that sectors could individually talk about what were those best practices underneath the framework within their industry. Fourth, what is your average week in cyber? So are you constantly getting denial of service attacks? Are you constantly having people forget laptops or mobile devices, company devices out on the BART? What does a normal threat look like? Because you want to establish what that normal signal level is so that when you see a spike, you know that that's when it's 3 o'clock, answer your phone, game on time, right? And then finally, drilling your incident response plan. So this is critical because you do not want to be exchanging business cards in the middle of an emergency and saying, hi, I'm Jim, I'm responsible for fixing everything. And it's like, oh, great, Jim, I've never met you before in my life. I don't trust you. I don't know what you're going to do. How do I know that you're not going to walk out the door to the press or a competitor with this information? How do I not know you're going to bail on me? Do you know what to do? All of these types of things. And that includes a strong public PR plan, too. One of the key factors that is important, not just for security, but also for the health of a company, is to understand how to talk about a cyber incident and when to talk about a cyber incident, right? You see a lot of people either rush, and rushing either puts out bad information that could potentially hurt your company in the eyes of your customers, or it could tip off an adversary who is still resident in your networks. And that has happened, right? Going out to the press trying to do the right thing can lead you tripping on your face. And on the other side, waiting too long can lead you into serious regulatory trouble if you're responsible for holding certain information. And it can also completely damage the public trust when they find out that you were hacked 2 years ago and you decided not to tell anybody. A lot of good professionals do this. We work with Stroh's Freeburg a lot on the incident response side. So they end up packaging a lot together for our customers. How do you talk about this along with what should you be doing? And to actually find out more of this stuff, you can go to Department of Homeland Security's website, uscert.gov, and the C-cubed VP. It's kind of a complicated name. But you go online, you search for DHS CEO, and they have a ton of useful tools and information there to hand up to senior executives so they can educate themselves on some of the best practices for being a cyber-savvy CEO. The last thing I'm going to pitch, you can go online and you can download our book. So we brought together around 40 different industry experts from academia and CEOs themselves and board members and asked them, what's most important to you about cybersecurity? They came back with over 350 pages, an anthology of best practice for the CEO and board level. I've had to read the whole thing because I edited it, but most of the time people just go in and pick out a few critical chapters and go through and flag it and hand a copy to their boss, right? It's also available online to download at securityroundtable.org. With that, thank you very much for coming. Happy to answer any questions. I know it's a big crowd, so you may not all get a chance to ask questions, but yeah.
What was the company you said you used for incident response?
Stroh's Freeburg, yeah. So the kind of issue with incident response companies a lot of times, so we have a prevention-based message, right? We don't like to do doom and gloom because we like to encourage people thinking about their strategy and their architecture rather than just kind of saying, I'm afraid I'm going to buy something because I'm scared. Stroh's has that same mentality, we found, so we end up going to market with them a lot or referencing them a lot.
I have hard copies, handful left of that book. Guys, even here, if you need one. Yeah, okay. Exchange contact information. We got it back at the house, but I can use one.
Cool.
Question about SaaS.
Yeah.
So, all threat now SaaS, right? But typically the SaaS partner is going to tell you all about the security built into their application. Can you contrast what the SaaS partners are doing versus what customers should be doing?
Yeah. So it's a great thing on Amazon's website, and it's like, it talks about the security of the cloud is their problem, right? How well the code is written, how strong their infrastructure is, what their auditing for their personnel is, all great stuff. Security in the cloud is your problem, right? How things are set up. Advanced actor, pretty much every actor today actually, goes in using existing credentials from a spearfish, accesses authorized applications based on the user that they've stolen, and does bad things, right? And SaaS allows them to do that at scale. So what we've seen, for example, is legitimate users being controlled by an illegitimate user, deploying malware in like a cloud sharing service. Everybody goes to that file to download that same report. Everybody gets infected across the pond. There's also the case of shadow IT too, right? You stand up something for your company to use, you don't secure it properly, someone can log in from home, out goes your product roadmap. So the same type of security threats you want to think about setting up zero trust architecture, thinking about the risk levels that you're acceptable for the types of files that are being shared and types of users are going in. Same thing applies to SaaS. Even though the infrastructure it's built on, I would hands down say that most of the time a high professional SaaS application, the code behind that is most of the time enormously better than a custom-built solution somehow that you've kind of built for yourself, just because the number of eyeballs that can look at that code and erase vulnerabilities from it. So there's really a little bit of two security stories there. Cool. Well, thanks very much for coming, guys. I appreciate it. Hope you guys have a rest of a good day.